So I've been pen pals with Dave Wishnowski for almost 20 years, and this is the first time we're speaking face to face, and we thought we'd keep the cameras rolling for anyone among our shared audience who is also interested in the wrestling game development process. So Dave, for anyone in my audience who's not already familiar with you and Pro Wrestling X, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, you know what? That should be easily the most basic question for me to answer. But as you know, man, with a history as long as we both had, it's hard to kind of sum up pretty quickly, isn't it? Right? I guess the best way I would sum things up is a long time ago when WrestleMania X8 came out for GameCube, I was the typical angry keyboard troll going, lazy developers, they don't care, they're stupid. And somebody on a GameFAQs forum said, well, hey, asshole, if you think you can do better, why don't you make your own game? And this will make you laugh. I thought, fine, how hard can it be to make a wrestling game? I'll make a wrestling game. So over the last many, many years, I've taken a different path than you, whereas you are a talented, knowledgeable indie developer. I had no background. I had a college diploma in jazz studies, and I didn't play jazz all that well to begin with. So I kind of went the typical route, you know. I learned how to raise funding to open a studio, hire programmers and artists, and went through a long history of that to eventually land where I am today with a game, Pro Wrestling X, on Steam Early Access that we've been just building incrementally in baby steps, having a shit ton of fun doing it. So that's kind of where I'm from and where I'm at.
Yeah, when you said WrestleMania X8, that rang a bell for me because my first memory of interacting with you was back when you had the Wrestling Gamers United website, and I recall that was some sort of rallying cry for people who were disenfranchised with the way wrestling games, well, what wrestling games had become, and kind of petitioning for change. Is that how you remember that period?
Yeah, I was as naive as you possibly could have been about the game industry. A lot of people still are that naive, ironically enough. And back in the day, I thought it was going to be as simple as putting up a website saying, hey, wrestling game developers, THQ, Electronic Arts, come talk to us passionate wrestling gamers, and we'll tell you exactly what makes a good wrestling game. You know, because generally the people that supported what I was doing were really into Fire Pro Wrestling kind of games, and especially the Aki Nintendo 64 games from Revenge, No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000. And then, of course, we nerded out and totally got into the Virtual Pro Wrestling 1 and 2, Japan. So we thought, well, if you know why a wrestling game is fun, it should be very, very simple to translate that into a playable game that you can ship to people around the world, right? So yeah. after about a year of realizing I was making an ass out of myself, that no game publisher was going to give me the time of day. I mean, I walked into the offices at Electronic Arts and literally filled out a little form saying, hey, I can make you a wrestling game, give me a call. And the nice receptionist lady kind of patted me on the head and said, okay, well, we'll give you a call, boy.
That's a common misconception, is people think that ideas are very valuable in this industry. Oh, I've got so many ideas. It's the execution of the ideas that we get paid for that gets the ball rolling. And that's something you either learn the hard way or not. But yeah,
well,
as you said, sorry.
So you've probably seen this as many times as I have, and it's a bit bittersweet because on one hand, it feels good to kind of do what we do and ship our games and inspire people to go, hey, I've got an idea for a wrestling game, I'm going to make one. And it seems like every 6 months there is a flurry of someone else online going, I'm going to make the greatest wrestling game ever. Here's my Unreal mod. Here's my proof of concept where I've used the Endorphin engine and look at all the cool flips I can do with physics. And then you never see these people actually develop one character grappling another character, body slamming them, and stand back up in idle position. I mean, once it gets to the part of actually programming a game, people realize that all the greatest ideas in the world, they don't develop themselves.
But to this day, I still get emails from kids saying, I gave you that idea for a zombie game. I said, you should make a zombie game. And then you made a zombie game. And I don't recall getting any of the money. And it's like, the ideas are not valuable. We've all got dreams, we've all got ideas, we've all got ambitions. It's the hard work, the grind of turning that dream into reality. And it's not always a pretty process, as I'm sure you're discovering.
It's actually never, ever a pretty process. process. Like, I swear, like, 2% of what I do at Pro Wrestling X is fun.
Yeah.
You know? And the other 98% is the behind the scenes grind that you don't see on the screen. You know? It's really, really difficult to get across to people what it actually takes to make a game, because then you come across like a whiner, like you're just bitching about it, you know?
Because it is a dream job at the end of the day, and you don't want to sound ungrateful, but at the same time, it's a dream job because it's a difficult job, and so that's the balance you've got to strike.
Well, how did you? One thing I've always wanted to ask you about is how you manage to stick to your vision and play to your strengths. Because, as you know, as soon as you put yourself out there as somebody who wants to do something, but that actually takes the step of delivering something to people, and it's not exactly what they expected. I mean, I had to deal with, and still do, constantly, as soon as you put something out, people are calling you're a scammer, you're a liar, you're taking people's money, your game's broken. And I know from the very earliest parts of your career, you couldn't log onto the internet for more than 10 seconds without reading Matt Dickey is a delusional, narcissistic asshole and his games look like shit.
Yeah.
Like, how did you keep motivated to keep going when early on it was just 99% hate?
I've asked myself the same question a couple of times, because people say I'm deluded and they assume it's a bad thing. But guess what? That delusion kept me going for 20 years. And so at what point is a delusion good or a delusion bad? If the delusion motivates you and gets you out of bed in the morning to complete projects and then project after project, if that delusion serves you so well, maybe we need to find a different word for it. That's how I feel.
Yeah, because honestly, going back in time, and I can be absolutely honest with myself and say, if I knew exactly what it was going to take, like the realities of what it was going to take, and if I wasn't delusional and optimistic all the time, I don't know if that version of myself 20 years ago would have had the balls and guts to keep going, knowing what the next 20 years would entail, what all those great moments and wins were actually going to cost.
We can take this journey one step at a time, but if you saw the whole staircase, I would say no. You wouldn't go down that path. But yeah, I can't say the delusion was bad. But here's the way my life panned out was I stopped playing mainstream games because I was so focused on making my own little games, and that was a blessing, because if I was exposed to like the AAA games every day, I couldn't sit back down with my own games and be satisfied. But because I was delusional, I was in a bubble. These crude Lego Man graphics became normal to me, and I'm still in that phase now. The game I'm making now, the games I've made on the mobiles, they're behind the times, they're old-fashioned, they're subpar, but my brain tunes into it and thinks that's normal. That's what happened with the frame rate. The frame rate is very low on the mobile apps, terribly low, 15 frames per second. My brain thought that was normal for 10 years. I thought that was normal. And now it hurts my eyes when I look at it. It hurts my own eyes when I look at my own games. Now that I'm using Unity, I'm consistently 30 frames per second on all platforms. It's looking, and now I see the world the way everybody else saw it. Now I see why those graphics gave you a headache. Now I know why it made you sick. Now I know why the journalists find it so hard to tolerate.
Oh, fuck the journalists. We'll get to that part soon. I have met in my life, it's funny, probably 3 to 4 journalists that I actually fucking felt understood and got it, and the ones that do are amazing. Patrick Hickey Jr., shout out to you, bud. But I mean, going back, like, you talk about your graphical style, and that's always been one of the big frustrations with the mass market of people. Like, why doesn't Matt Dickey hire an artist? Why doesn't he do this to compete with WWE games? And I'm thinking, I can scroll through screenshots of 100 generic wrestling games. I can pick your games out from any lineup. So if that was intentional, you'd be a genius. You know what I mean? Like, it makes sense. It's not a limitation. It's a freaking art style. Nobody complains. Well, actually, people do. Fire Pro Wrestling hasn't changed its look. Yeah, Fire Pro still looks the same.
But
you know?
it goes even deeper than that. The graphics are the reason the games are cheap and affordable. The graphics are the reason they're quick. The graphics are the reason it's a small file size. The small file size is the reason it got downloaded so many times. So if you run it all the way back to those graphics, they're responsible for everything everything that was successful about my games. Small, lightweight. That's where the millions of downloads come from. And that's where the friction with journalists come from. Because as I was saying, if I was exposed to AAA games every day, I would hate my own games. They are exposed to AAA games every hour of every day. So when they see me, it's like they've seen a car wreck. I can fully understand that my games are a car crash to a journalist who is ensconced in this world. But guess what? I'm not entertaining 1,000 journalists. I'm reaching millions of children all over the world, some of whom are in the slums of India and the favelas of Brazil, and they've got this mediocre Android phone. And guess what? My games are the only ones that run on it. They can't run some AAA game, most of the WWE games, a 1 gigabyte download, the top maximum system requirements. It only works on your Samsung Galaxy S10. That's where my millions of downloads come from. So people can criticize me for it all you want. It came good in the end. Maybe not always my intention, but it happened.
I would absolutely say so. So speaking of journalists, I mean, I know that there was one, at least for me, like witnessing your career from the outside, the first time I ever really got my kind of like the hair in the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like I had to defend what you were doing, was when I think it was an article, I want to say Ars Technica, where the journalist backhandedly complimented you as the best, worst game developer in the world. Yeah. That was a chicken shit move. You know
for two reasons. Because he didn't say it to my face. I sat with him for an hour. Two hours, in fact. I caught him on a second hour. And he didn't say any of this to my face. And I wish he had, because we could have had a different conversation. I'm happy to hear the criticism and talk it out, because there is an intelligent conversation to be had about why I do these things, the pros and cons. But to say, this is shit, that's shit, this is the worst game ever, that's the worst game, obviously that's not true. If it was the worst game ever, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There are thousands of apps on the store that are worse than mine, and there's a reason you're not talking about them. It's because...
Well... Yeah, but worse in what way, right? I mean, you justifiably point out, dude, 50 million downloads of my games, motherfucker. How many have you made? And then people get into the debate of popularity. Does that equal quality, whatnot? To me, it's like coming to the realization all this time that making video games was not a trade necessarily. It wasn't software development in the traditional sense, because I know when we first started out, we always tried to ask ourselves, okay, well, how would Apple do this? What kind of structure would they have? What would their management style be? Let's do our design documentation and everything you're supposed to do when making video games. And it seems like it's kind of come full circle, like the industry has finally caught up with what you were doing, which is, for lack of a better term, you're making art. I mean, I think most game developers, aside from the most crass, capitalist ones, are making art, man, and that's where I think you kind of sit in the scene. How do you think about that?
Yeah, insofar as it's personal, yes, there's that artistic element where my life is just literally poured into the games. It's 100% my vision. It's 100% what I envisage, without any compromises and that's how I feel about it as well. I feel I've taken something that was very bureaucratic, an office block full of people, and I've turned it into something as natural as strumming a guitar. That's how I feel about it. I make games for people's birthdays, the way someone would write a song for someone's birthday. So when you say it's art, insofar as it has that impact on my life, I can't argue with that. It is this thing that goes beyond making money. It's this thing that I do to my own satisfaction, and sometimes to the satisfaction of others, very organically, very naturally. And I think that's a good argument for the artistic merit.
So do you think you took a break for a couple of years from game development, and like a typical wrestler does, announced your retirement only to come screaming back there? So what changed? Because I totally understand, and maybe you want to speak a little bit to why you were so frustrated to leave in the first place, but what changed to bring you back? Did the industry finally catch up with you, or did you just feel like you had unfinished business and couldn't sleep at night?
Yeah, in 2008, I was done. I am the Mick Foley or the Ric Flair of game development. I just say I'm gone, and then I show straight back up again 2 years later. I can't stay out the ring. But yeah, in 2008, I had reached the limit of what I could accomplish on the PC, and people were getting tired of it. Even my biggest supporters weren't 100% on board. I was being pilloried by the press, mocked on YouTube, and you start to think you're crazy. If you get criticized 1,000 times a day, you start to think it's a kind of gaslighting where they think, okay, if that many people think I'm crazy, I must be crazy. And so I thought, okay, that's fine. I've got better things to do with my time. I'll just do something else. But then by 2010, I was spending more time. No, 2011. I was spending more time in China, and I saw mobiles take off in a way I'd never seen in the UK. Everybody had a tablet in front of them. Everybody had their mobile phone playing Fruit Ninja. And that got me going again. I thought, okay, my games weren't good enough for the PC, but I can put a 2D game on that phone in their hand, and that will keep them amused. It'll at least keep me amused. And I had this vision so clearly that I could bring 2D wrestling to a mobile in the palm of your hand. And I spent the whole of 2012 just making that happen in Flash. I had to reinvent myself as a Flash developer. I'd never used that until that point. And then, I managed to get pretty lucky with my first major game was Wrestling Revolution, which used a kind of 2D puppetry in Flash to just display my vision of wrestling. It wasn't perfect, but it was cute and it was unusual. And at the time, it was the biggest wrestling game anyone had ever held in the palm of their hand. And to this day, 8 years later, it's still pretty popular and still in the store.
Well, that actually, you touched on something else I'd like to talk about. The idea of perfection when making games, art, when making, like, for better or for worse, a product that we sell to people and we have expectations, right? We've always kind of been under the sort of unofficial mantra where we are of make it work, then make it work well, then make it pretty, and then ship it. But we found a few years ago when we had no choice but to ship what we had because we had no more resources. And when we shipped our first little game, Pro Wrestling X Uprising, I was on one hand proud because it was not easy. It took a lot of hard work to get it playable even to a point where you could release it. But it was so far removed from what I had envisioned and what I promised people I was trying to make that I was ashamed of it in a lot of ways, despite all the work we put into it. But I was really pleasantly surprised and have to give credit to a lot of our supporters and a lot of the general public. They saw the potential. They didn't need to see perfection. And if they saw a spark of potential, they were like, keep fucking going, please. Yeah. So where do you sit? When do you decide something is ready to ship versus doesn't meet your perfection standards?
I think what got me this far was completing projects and delivering projects even if they weren't perfect. It's that evolution of just shipping the project. Okay, so if that one wasn't perfect, we'll get it right second time round. Maybe not with an update, but just remake the game again. Pop Scene 2, the Wrestling Empire 2008 instead of 2006. It's this evolution where it feels like you're going around in circles, but you're releasing projects that lived its full life. It either succeeded or failed. We're going to start again. We're going to keep what worked, improve what didn't, add more. And so I do believe that perfection is the... they say necessity is the mother of invention. I think perfection is the enemy of invention. And it's really one of the worst habits you can bring into this profession, because if you do not complete projects, you will never... If you're a perfectionist, you'll never release a single project. I mean... I've heard a lot of movie directors saying a good movie is never complete, it's only ever abandoned. Because you don't have enough hours in the day or enough months in the year to do your perfect movie. They're all leaving things on the cutting room floor. They're all in agony about it. And a game designer, especially a young one, has to come at it with the same attitude. You've got to do the best you can in the time you've got and then release. Go through the process of completing a project, shipping a project, and then take that experience into the next project. And maybe even financially take some of that financial support into the next project as well. Because perfection doesn't exist.
That kind of brings me to my next point, which is you talk about releasing it and then take what you get from that. And a lot of times what you'll get from that is people are... Obviously, you're going to find people who applaud you and go, this is cool, keep going. But what do you do with, they don't teach you in high school, how to deal with waking up one day, opening your social media, and reading that someone thinks you're worse than Hitler and need to be shot because of your fucking video game, you know?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with, obviously, as you've grown, you've learned to process that toxicity that they call it, you know, the hate, the vitriol, jealousy, what it is mostly. People really fucking hate seeing someone like you happy doing what you're doing.
That's my answer is, I had an epiphany quite recently, really, where I thought, do these people care about me? Do they want me to be happy? Do they want me to be successful? Guess what? The answer was no. They don't care about me. They don't want me to be happy. They don't care about my family. They don't care about my bank balance. And so I've started filtering it now. Like, when I receive criticism, who is this person? Do they want what's best for me? No. Okay, then I'm going to have to leave them to it. If they do, okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it politely, constructively, intelligently. But guess what? Most people will not come at you aggressively if they care about you. And so it's a pretty clear distinction. It takes you a long time to see it, but when I saw it, I can't stop seeing it. That these people do not care about me, and
you probably, like I have, you probably experienced where someone is initially angry because they don't like something about your game, and they maybe express it in a personal attack kind of way. So many times I've actually just replied to people like that, going, "Hey man, you're absolutely right. This part of our game isn't better. If you were in my position, what would you do next?" And so many people turned around and apologized for being assholes and said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I had a bad day. Thank you for talking." But yeah, there are people, and this was like one of the hardest parts for me to get used to, because I am generally a very passive, optimistic, dreamer person, like most artists do this. And coming to the stark realization that there were people in this world who actively want another human being to fail and suffer. That was a hard pill to swallow.
Well, put it this way: I've never met a hater that I want to trade lives with, and I think that's pretty revealing.
I've often said, you know, if you take the people that support us and the people that hate us and stand them in front of me, I'm pretty happy with the way that group splits up.
And guess what? We can focus on the positives, because I've got a lot of respect for the people that do see the good in my work, even though there's all these. Every day they're bombarded with messages saying, "Do not like this guy, do not like this game, worst game ever, worst game ever, worst game ever." They're still here. And I think that takes a lot of integrity to kind of, every day you're told these messages to kind of proceed in faith and just show your support, even though, and they're probably taking a hit on social media, and they're inviting trouble of their own just to support people like me and you. I have a lot of respect for that as well. So it's one thing to be upset about the criticism, but there's also a lot of positives to focus on as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I look at, you know, how we built our community behind Pro Wrestling X, and yeah, it's not easy to be a Pro Wrestling X supporter most days, because, you know, we're delayed, we're having troubles one way or another. So when we do get a win, when we do ship something, and like it's really cool, I really feel like those people that have supported us deserve, you know, a few wins of their own following Pro Wrestling X to be able to say, "See, I told you so." That's not nothing, you know. But yeah, it can be pretty hard to be a fan of or a supporter of an indie developer who is open and transparent like we are about the day-to-day struggles and grinds. You know, it isn't as easy as what they're used to. They see like a WWE 2K franchise, and they think, why can't you release a brand new game every year like 2K does? You know,
when the difference is so stark. An office block full of highly trained professionals, and the idea that we even come close to even starting a project like that should blow people's minds. But of course, you take it for granted. And at the end of the day, I take all criticism as a compliment, because what they're saying is, you've made this look easy. You've taken this extremely complicated thing. You've made it look so easy that I think I could do better than you, and I think you're full of shit. To which I say, be my guest. Please sit me under the learning tree.
Exactly. Well, what would you say to those what would you say to the people who, you probably get this a lot too, where, people are like, hey, I dig your game, it's really cool. You should really hook up with a wrestling company one day and get a license, and then you'd be set for life, if you made a game for another wrestling company.
Oh, I think it's quite the opposite about being set for life. I think I would take a huge financial hit if I just divided the pie into for no particular reason, because for me, I don't see any financial benefit to working with any company except WWE. I mean, it's the only one that's a household name, so that's the only one that would get me excited financially. Otherwise, it's kind of charity work. I mean, I've worked with real promotions in the past, and and they think this is their big break. Oh, this is my chance. This is our big break to earn millions of dollars, like WWE does. We're getting a game. $1 million, please. We want to be as rich and famous as WWE now. And it's like, no, you have to come to me as a household name, and then we're starting to benefit from it. If I make you famous, if I legitimize you, if I give you something to get excited about, that's all us. That's all the developer. Because I can make a game without them. They can't make a game without me. So there's a real power imbalance for me when I work with independent promotions.
I've talked to so many developers who've been through the process of working with another wrestling company to put another wrestling company in their game, or quote unquote real wrestlers in their game. And even to this day, when development costs are, they're at least simpler than they used to be 20 years ago, I would say I haven't spoken to a developer yet who said it was a better decision than just making their own universe, their own characters, and doing it their way. Because, like you said, the perceived value of a video game is so skewed. People see video games and they go, "Oh, video games are 99 cents on the App Store, so they can't take that much time or resources to make it. They sell them for 99 cents, or now give them away for free, and they don't get it." I mean, I don't know about you, but it would take me, if I was to build just a character, a brand new wrestler from the ground up, and at least give him his signature moveset and animate everything by hand and pay industry standard rates for the artists and whatnot to do that, it's at least $10,000 per character, at least.
Yeah, for me, I don't quite have. For me, it's not a financial issue because my graphics aren't good enough for it to be that time consuming. It's a pretty simple transaction. But for me, it's.
What do you think?
For me, it's like it's almost an ethical issue. It's like you do. I feel they don't appreciate what I would be doing for them. That I would be legitimizing them. Because I think it's a vanity project where they want to be in a game more than I want them to be in a game. I mean, I had someone talking to me about the MMA game saying, if you put me in the MMA game, can I be the cover star? Can I be this? Can I be that? And I'm like, you're not a household name. I've got no interest in doing that at all. You just want to go home and tell your friends and family that you're on the front cover of a game. And I'm not interested in, I'm not a charity that's providing that service for you. And so for me, there's a real conflict between what people expect from the experience and what I am genuinely willing to give them out of the experience, and it never ever makes sense.
Yeah, and plus there is and I'll just be completely honest, but there's a skewed sense of value that other wrestling companies and wrestlers kind of bring to it, and I get that, because when you're a wrestler, you're an independent contractor and you're in business for yourself, and that totally makes sense to me. But I mean, we've worked with a few different indie wrestlers, and the scale of people who are understandable and really cool and get the economics of the situation in terms of the value they bring, value we bring, is awesome. Yeah. But there are some people, I know of a couple indie wrestlers that wouldn't even talk to us for less than like 15 grand. Like they wanted up front. And I'm thinking, $15,000 means I got to make my $15,000 back just because you're in my game. I don't know how many fans you have, but you better at least sell 30,000 more copies of my game for it to even make sense to me.
Exactly, and it's preposterous to think that one face. Because here's the problem: wrestling games have dozens of characters, if not hundreds, as a matter of course now. And so, if you're one face out of 100. What is your value to that project? So yeah, especially in my project, have 300 characters. So.
I always thought that the best way to do it, believe it or not, Electronic Arts. In their USC games, they have I don't know if I'm breaking anybody's NDA by saying this, but they have a mechanic where they can actually track how often your character is used in game, and they pay you a royalty based on how many times people use it. They have a pool that they have X amount of revenue set in this pool, and it's shared amongst the roster depending on how often people use your character. I mean, that's almost like a meritocracy. That kind of works. Not too bad. But people that want like tens of thousands up front, Hulk Hogan. Who was I talking? Somebody asked Hulk Hogan that he wanted $1 million just to have the meeting. Just to have the meeting.
Well, Hulk Hogan is not a million miles off. Back in the day, he was a draw, and that name would have been worth $1 million to put on the front of your box, as they did with one Legends of Wrestling game, didn't they? But there's Hulk Hogan, and then there's 1,000 wrestlers who are nowhere near Hulk Hogan's stature, and people don't want to hear that they do fall into that bracket.
So what makes sense then? Because I know I almost feel like we're having a resurgence of wrestling. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where you were lucky if you could find 2 hours of wrestling on TV. And now we've got all these promotions, that are still alive and kicking. Ring of Honor, Impact, AEW now making noise. WWE has extended into NXT and the brands and whatnot. Do you think going forward, are we ever going to be at a time again where you can get like a half a dozen different wrestling games featuring different companies made by different developers? Are we ever going to be that way again, or has the landscape become so vastly different and changed that the odds of that old school way of doing business ever happening again?
Well, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine anyone except WWE bringing a wrestling game into existence from scratch. Because to have ownership of it, that's pretty much what you'd have to do. And people forget that Fire Pro evolved over 30 years. My games evolved over 20 years. Even the AKI games evolved from 1996 to 2000 to get what we had with No Mercy. That was a nice little 5-year evolution. So anyone who wants to enter this marketplace is saying, I can fake all of that natural evolution that happened organically over decades. And I'm going to get it right first time. And they're either going to fail or, well, they're going to fail, basically. Because
are they? Because I wanted to ask you about this. Exactly the point you're making right now. We're in a situation where AEW is making some noise that they're going to make a video game. They're going to have a video game, and they're hinting along the lines that they're going to resurrect the No Mercy engine. They're going to work with Aki in some form, and most people know that Aki doesn't exist anymore. It's a different company. The original team that made No Mercy has disbanded. They're nowhere. So at best, they'll have a code base. Maybe they've got access to a code base from an old Nintendo 64 game. And from what we tend to know about AEW, they have a lot of money. But wrestling companies don't generally pay to get games made. They're paid to get games made for them. Yeah. So I have no idea what their publishing situation is like. I'd like to think that they're going to do something relatively forward-thinking with their business model, and maybe, I don't know, but the idea of walking into a GameStop anytime soon and seeing AEW, the wrestling game, and have it feel like No Mercy 2, to me is a long shot. Money or no money.
Yeah, but when people say they're going to resurrect the No Mercy engine, I have to stop and think, what does that mean? Because you're not literally going to take the source code from 20 years ago and magically put it through Unity and blossom on lots of different platforms. It's gone, basically. I can't imagine there's anything to salvage or anyone to salvage it from. Because Sin Sophia haven't expressed an awful lot of interest. I'm sure it's long out of their minds. I mean, I can't imagine I'm working on a project I did 20 years ago. And so literally doing that is not on the table. Spiritually doing that and being inspired by No Mercy, inspired by that style to do something similar is possible. But again, that's what I was about to say when I said they've got two options. They either try and fail to do something new, or the alternative is to get involved with an existing franchise. So that like New Japan did with Fire Pro. New Japan didn't succeed in bringing their own mobile franchise to mobiles. They did succeed in aligning themselves with Fire Pro and saying, okay, we're the centerpiece of this existing game. And I see a lot of wisdom in AEW becoming part of an existing game, maybe even the same game, like Fire Pro versus AEW versus New Japan within the promoter mode of Fire Pro. And then that sends that demographic home happy. They've got a game, a critically acclaimed game. They're legitimized by being able to say we've got a game without the huge investment of time and money to force a game into existence against its will and succeed first time.
Well, let's look at history, right? We've had a couple of opportunities to do this in recent memory. There was a time when TNA was doing well, and they had a deal to make a wrestling game through Midway. Midway was a proven publisher. They had money to spend. They were working with a developer that, while they didn't make critically acclaimed games, I think they had made the Backyard Wrestling games, I believe. They at least knew how to make two characters grapple and fight. And then they had, just like AEW, they had a couple people on their roster, like at the time AJ Styles and I believe Samoa Joe, who were really, really big wrestling game nerds. They could talk virtual pro wrestling in circles. I know they could. I did it with them.
Yeah.
And even with all those ingredients, they were still bound by the laws of time and money. And when that TNA game came out, it was just a sliver of what we hoped it would be because they didn't have 5 years to develop it. Yeah, and then fast forward to most recently, they made a change with the WWE games, with the 2K games. They switched developers midstream, right? They got rid of Ukes and they gave it to another developer. And here's what we had. We had an existing, completely proven wrestling game code base, like Style or Not, with the 2K games. You had, obviously, all the money you needed. You had an experienced crew, and yet disaster. Fucking disaster, right? So, given that, I was always, and we talked about this briefly over email, I thought AEW should get involved with the indie developers and do something working with us, like guest starring in our games or whatnot, and really kind of speak to that crowd. But like you said earlier about it being vanity, I have to wonder if with AEW, because they want to compete head on head with WWE on WWE's turf, I really think they're going to try to go the route of making a standard retail release wrestling game, and I really fear for that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Have you heard the rumors about them wanting to work with, maybe working with Ukes and kind of inheriting the WWE engine, and then, because I think their instinct will be to go towards that realistic, modern, impressive form of game development. But at the same time, I think that could be a disconnect with their fans because this is their opportunity to do something different. Because Kenny Omega and Cody Rhodes are fans of the Nintendo 64. They do come from that era, and in their heart they would like to do something unusual and something that stands out. But I can't imagine it'd be easy to convince people not to go the realistic route. Which for me, I think realism is overrated in games. I mean, why do we keep talking about No Mercy? I mean, we're at a point where we can depict anything. Photorealistic visuals, perfect models, perfect hair. They can be as big as you want, on any scale you want. How come we're still pining for a game that was squeezed onto a Nintendo 64 cartridge with low poly models, low res textures, handmade animations? What is it what is it that makes us pine for that era if realism is so good?
Well, let me flip it right around and ask you that very question. Why do you think people are still pining for that No Mercy experience?
Well, for me, I keep thinking of Star Wars. You know, in the 1970s, I think George Lucas was saved from himself by having to use practical effects in the 1970s. He can't do this, so he has to do this. And he accidentally made the one of the best movies of all time. Fast forward to the prequels and even the sequels, we can do whatever we want. Whoops, all the magic's gone. Our brains are falling out, and because there's nothing focusing them. And so I see the same thing that's happened in wrestling games where, yes, we can do whatever we want now. We're still attracted to this era when we couldn't, when we had to compromise. We had to squeeze onto a cartridge because those compromises promoted creativity. And so for me, it's no coincidence that wrestling games became unplayable at the exact same moment they became realistic. If you cast your mind back to that 2001, 2002, we started to see the photorealistic visuals, higher poly models, and then people got complacent, and the gameplay kind of became an afterthought. So yeah, that's the way I feel about it. And that's where we come in, because independents are keeping the era of the compromise alive, because we're the ones that have to compromise now. We're the ones that have to hustle. We're the ones that have to sacrifice. We're the ones that have to think differently. And so this is a good opportunity for us as well. If that era truly was better, this is our opportunity to prove it and to bring it forward.
Well, I'm glad you spoke to that, because I know on our side with our crew, and we've got just a little 3-man crew over here at Pro Wrestling X. We've had some opportunities in recent memory to possibly work with some other companies, and we've actually had our little come to Jesus kind of talk where we said, what's going to happen if we get an offer to develop a game for another company, like just flat out act as a developer under the creative control of someone else. The trade-off being we'd be guaranteed wages at least for a year or two, so that would be a nice change, right? And to my surprise, and even with the feedback from our community, people like don't do it. Like, don't. It's not worth it to go to work for someone else when you've been making better for worse art like we have. Like, if someone said to me, here's $1 million, Pro Wrestling X, but you got to put Pro Wrestling X to bed and you got to make Joe Blow's wrestling game, I wouldn't take the deal, man.
I mean, why do you think I work alone for so long? I mean, who else is going to give me this much freedom? I've had enough run-ins with publishers and things to know that just one person on your back can drain all the creativity out of you. They'll shoot down every idea you've ever had. And so, yeah, that's why I'm so protective of working alone, because it's so valuable to me, that freedom to literally do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. To sacrifice that, you've got to pay me. It's not the other way around. I'm not paying you to destroy my freedom. No.
Well, it definitely plays to something I've heard a few times where they say the definition of success is waking up every morning and doing what you want to do, right? And I think we're both in that position, which I think waking up just to get a paycheck to do what somebody else wants me to do is not a move up.
Yeah, when I first started considering entering the industry, a lot of people warned me and said, it's crap. You work 18 hours a day on somebody else's project, and it's not what you thought it would be. And I haven't experienced that for a single day, so I feel very lucky to have carved out my own little niche. Even if it wasn't easy at times, it's always been real and it's been enjoyable for me.
Well, that's why, when I think of, our company and a few other indie devs approached AEW within the last year. We made it only so far when it became clear they weren't interested in working with the indies. Fair enough. I get it. It's a risky maneuver, But I think, and talking to all of them involved, surprisingly, most of us said, we'd be happy to experiment with putting 1 or 2 AEW characters in our game and maybe build an AEW venue for fans to play in on the condition of, and this is unheard of, on the condition of that we retain full creative control. So it's like being flipped on its head in the last generation, like you said. It's now become a case of, if people want to work with the game developers themselves are in such a better position of leverage, for lack of a less douchebaggy term, that nobody's begging for scraps anymore. We've realized our value. And while it's not billions of dollars, our value is worth something to all of us.
I mean, because we're not just talking about creating a game; we're talking about bringing it to market. So you're in with Steam, so you would bring it to Steam. I'm in with Google and Apple, and even Nintendo now. So I bring Nintendo to the table. So that affects the price. That has value in and of itself. And so these companies, I don't think they have a very accurate understanding of. I think you're right insofar as any independent promotion would benefit from the guerrilla marketing you're suggesting. Logically, if they expose themselves to thousands of wrestling fans in lots of different places and just invaded the wrestling game industry, the exposure, the advertising value of that would be very high. But they never see it that way. They never see it as kind of a brand extension. They see it as, this is my opportunity to bank millions of dollars and legitimize my brand. Whereas you're not wrong to think that they would indeed benefit from exposure. You just can't convince them of it.
So where do you go from here then, Matt? I know you've got just a few minutes here. You got some company coming. Most people that are following this and watching this are fairly familiar with where you've been. What's coming next down the plate for you in the next year or two?
Well, 2020 is very exciting for me because I've been accepted into the Nintendo Developer Program, and I've got a chance to bring Wrestling Revolution 3D to the Nintendo Switch, as well as a re-release on mobiles in a brand new form. Despite the apparent similarities, it's a brand new creation. It's a complete new code base in Unity, which has opened up the door to a lot of positives. The frame rate has doubled, the resolution has doubled, performance has doubled to the extent that there are no loading times. There are literally 0 loading times. And so I'm very excited about this project. This is the best incarnation of my 3D wrestling game I've ever been able to create. And I'm looking forward to bringing it to the Switch eventually, where I feel it will be quite well placed to entertain that demographic that has been somewhat neglected over the past 2 years, because WWE shit the bed when they tried to bring realism to the Switch, and it didn't work. And okay, nobody else is going to try this again for 2 or 3 years. But now independents such as myself and Mike Herman of Retrosoft with Retromania Wrestling is going to bring back 2D wrestling, a WrestleFest inspired wrestling game. And so between independent developers like that, as well as you and Dave Horn working on Action Arcade Wrestling, there's this push of alternatives that are going to come on every platform probably by the end of this year. And so that's going to be very, very exciting. I think it's going to be a return to what wrestling fans loved about the past, which is what we've been talking about so far.
But what about, I always thought that the added extra special sauce that made you even more interesting was the shit you did outside of wrestling. Like, what's next for the guy who made video games about Jesus and Michael Jackson?
Well, I am going to get round to all of them again eventually. That's my goal. I'm developing this game with one eye on the zombie game, and one eye on the superhero game, and one eye on when this is a school game, one eye when this is a prison game. So yeah, when I make a game, when I make a wrestling game, it usually spins out into every other variation of game I can think of, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm prepared for it.
Well, my only other request is that you please, I know you've done some writing in the past, please write a Life of M. Dickey book up to this point, man. I'd read the shit out of that.
Oh no, that's the only regret I ever have is writing a book, because when you write a book, it sets in stone something that shouldn't have been set in stone, because within a year, that book was out of date. Within a year, nothing in that book was how I felt, how I expressed myself. So, and yet, to the public, it still sits there as if it was. And so, I definitely don't recommend writing a book. No, it's not a good idea.
Well, that definitely makes me happy actually to hear that, because we all know that Matt Dickey doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. So that's why I'm super thankful that you wanted to sit down and do this interview, podcast, talking shit, whatever you want to call it. It's all good. So I can't thank you enough, man. I hope that we do this again on a semi-regular basis, because I don't think I've discussed 2% of what I'd like to chat with you about. So if people following Pro Wrestling X want to know more about Matt Dickey, where can they go to follow the insanity that is your life?
Well, my website's a bit inactive at the minute because we're all on just social media. We just take it for granted that we can just post things on there. So I'm on Facebook at mdickeyfans, and on Twitter at mdickey.com, spelled out DOTCOM. And any Instagram account is fake.
Fair enough, man. Well, again, super appreciate it. Matt Dickey fans watching this, you can check out the pro wrestling shit. Oh, social media, Pro Wrestling X. You guys aren't stupid. You know how to find it.
Yeah.
It's all good.